The desert sun had a way of pressing down on everything it touched. It wasn't just heat, it was weight, a constant burden that drained strength and stole breath. The forward operating base sat like a stubborn scar across the Afghan landscape, its concrete walls and sandbag barriers almost mocking the endless dunes that stretched for miles. Inside those walls, tension had become routine. The soldiers moved with weary precision, always glancing toward the horizon, knowing that somewhere out there, hidden in rocky ridges or dry riverbeds, the enemy watched them too. The commander stood at the observation post, binoculars pressed against his face. His skin, tanned and cracked from months in the desert, betrayed exhaustion. Weeks of indirect fire had left nerves frayed. Mortar had become part of their daily existence, sometimes inaccurate, sometimes devastating. They could never predict when the next shell would whistle overhead. Every distant sound carried the possibility of death. He lowered the binoculars and rubbed the bridge of his nose. Around him, soldiers shifted restlessly. Some smoked, others muttered curses into radios, but all of them carried the same question in their minds. How long could this go on? Among them was Sergeant Daniels. She sat in the shade of a battered wall, her Barrett rifle across her lap. Her face was half hidden beneath the brim of her helmet, but her eyes were alive, sharp, calculating, restless. Unlike the others, she didn't fidget or pace. She was still, the kind of stillness that came from discipline, not fatigue. Her movements were deliberate. Every time she shifted, it was purposeful, checking the rifle's chamber, adjusting the bipod, or wiping dust from the glass of her scope. Daniels was known for her quietness, not silence born of shyness, but silence that demanded respect. She rarely spoke, and when she did, her words carried weight. Many younger soldiers thought her cold, but those who'd seen her work knew differently. She was focused entirely, relentlessly focused. The commander's gaze drifted toward her, as it often did when tension grew unbearable. She was his insurance, the one soldier he trusted to make decisions in moments where hesitation meant death. Yet even with that trust, he couldn't ignore the question that nagged at him. What happens when even she meets her limit? The radio crackled suddenly. Movement, ridgeline, 3 clicks northeast. The words cut through the stillness like a blade. Soldiers snapped to attention, scanning with binoculars, squinting through the shimmering waves of heat rising off the ground. The commander swung his lenses toward the direction. The ridge was distant, a jagged line of rock barely distinguishable from the horizon. But there, faintly, was movement, tiny figures shifting against the stone. Confirm? The commander asked, his voice sharp. Confirmed. Multiple contacts. Looks like they're setting up equipment. The commander's stomach sank. Equipment on a ridge line could only mean one thing: mortar. His chest tightened at the thought of another barrage, another storm of fire raining down on his men. He glanced toward Daniels. She was already on her feet, the Barrett cradled against her shoulder, as naturally as if it were an extension of her body. She didn't rush. Her steps were measured, deliberate, carrying her to the firing position she had prepared days earlier. The soldiers around her paused, watching. Even the skeptics among them quieted, aware that something significant was about to unfold. Daniels lay prone, settling into the dust. She extended the bipod and nestled the rifle into position, pressing her cheek against the stock. Her breathing slowed, becoming shallow, controlled. Through the scope, the ridge snapped into focus. The world beyond her glass was clearer than reality itself. The commander moved beside her, lowering himself to one knee. He followed her line of sight, but couldn't see what she saw. Who's she targeting? He muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Daniels didn't answer. Her eyes never left the scope. Through the glass, the scene unfolded in minute detail. Men worked hurriedly, uncrating supplies, dragging long tubes across the rocks. One of them bent low, adjusting a mortar plate. The mortar tube gleamed faintly in the sunlight, unmistakable in its deadly purpose. Daniels adjusted her dials, fingers moving with mechanical precision. Wind, distance, elevation, all of it fed into her calculation. Her world shrank until it was nothing but crosshairs and the faint silhouette of a man preparing to kill her comrades. Around her, soldiers whispered, voices carrying doubt. No way she makes that shot. Too far. Waste of a round. She's good, but not that good. The commander didn't join them. He wasn't sure if he believed she could make the shot, but he knew one thing. Daniels wouldn't pull the trigger unless she believed she could. She inhaled, slow and steady, then let the air out until her lungs were nearly empty. Her heartbeat slowed, thudding in her ears like a metronome. She had done this countless times before on ranges, in training, in missions where lives depended on her. But this distance was different. 2,847 meters. The number sounded absurd, even to her, yet the math didn't lie. Her finger rested on the trigger, light as a feather. She waited, patient as stone. The man adjusting the mortar shifted slightly, bending at the waist. Daniel's eyes narrowed. This was the moment. The commander leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. Who's she targeting? This time, the question wasn't born of doubt, but of awe. Daniels exhaled the last of her breath. The trigger broke cleanly. The Barrett roared, the sound shaking through the base like thunder. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, but she absorbed it, already reacquiring her target through the scope. Soldiers around her flinched at the sound, some ducking instinctively. The bullet was gone, already tearing through the air at supersonic speed, invisible yet undeniable. The desert returned to silence. All eyes turned toward the ridge, waiting. Daniels didn't move. Her cheek pressed against the stock, her eye locked in the scope. She watched the seconds stretch, her breathing steady, her focus unbroken. The commander followed her gaze, his own breath caught in his chest. Somewhere far beyond reason and doubt, destiny was in motion. And the question still echoed in his head. Who's she targeting? The base had gone silent after the thunder of the Barrett's shot. But inside Sergeant Daniels' mind, silence had always been her most trusted companion. Long before she pulled the trigger in the desert, she had learned that silence was where calculation thrived, where details that others ignored came alive for her. Daniels had not become a sniper by accident. Her journey began years earlier on a wind-blown range in Kentucky, a recruit among many. Back then, she was known less for her strength and more for her stubbornness. While others celebrated after qualification rounds, Daniels stayed behind, firing until her shoulder bruised, and her instructors forced her to stop. Precision wasn't a skill to her, it was a responsibility. Her instructors noticed. One, a grizzled veteran with eyes like stone, once told her, "Anyone can pull a trigger, Daniels. Few can listen to what the wind tells them." She carried that line with her through every deployment. Now, crouched in the Afghan desert, she remembered it again. The wind was light, but it was present, brushing grains of sand across her cheek. Through the scope, her enemy seemed impossibly small, a speck on a ridge that should have been untouchable. For most marksmen, the distance itself would have been paralyzing. But to Daniels, it was simply another equation waiting to be solved. She reached for her range card, a small notebook filled with careful notes written during countless hours of observation. Distances, elevations, wind patterns. Each scribbled entry represented patience and discipline. She flipped to a page marked with a crease, one she had studied for days. 2,847 meters. The number alone could break confidence. But for Daniels, it was fuel. "Wind 5 knots left to right," she whispered under her breath. Her pencil tapped on the card. Elevation, high ridge, temperature 38 Celsius, humidity low. Each variable carried weight, and she stacked them carefully in her mind, like bricks building a wall. A weak foundation meant collapse, and collapse meant lives lost. Around her, soldiers shifted, watching with doubt and curiosity. They had never seen someone work the way she did, calm, deliberate, immune to their nerves. Some thought it arrogance, others obsession. But the commander knew better. He recognized the method, the obsession with detail that separated experts from amateurs. He lowered his binoculars and crouched beside her. "That's 3 clicks. What's your play?" Daniels didn't look up. Her eyes never left the scope. "It's math, sir." "Just math." The commander almost smiled. For her, maybe it was. For everyone else, it was madness. The Barrett rifle lay heavy against her shoulder, its barrel extending like a steel arm toward the horizon. Designed to stop vehicles and pierce armor, it wasn't meant for artistry. Yet, in Daniel's hands, it became a scalpel. She had spent years building familiarity with it, learning the recoil, memorizing its quirks, even feeling how the desert heat shifted its accuracy. Others fired it and complained of the bruises. She fired it and studied the vibration that lingered in her bones afterward. She recalled nights back at the forward base when others slept. She sat alone at makeshift tables, studying weather data, recalculating trajectories, testing variables in her head until exhaustion forced her to bed. She wasn't training to break a record. She was training because she knew someday, somewhere, lives would depend on precision no one thought possible. And now, that someday had arrived. "Target adjusting mortar," she murmured. The commander leaned in, peering through his binoculars. He could barely make out the figure, a blur of movement on a ridge that looked far enough away to belong to another world. Daniel's hands adjusted the scope, dials clicking softly under her fingertips. She compensated for wind drift, accounted for the Earth's rotation, the Coriolis effect, a concept most shooters dismissed. But at nearly 3 kilometers, even the planet's spin could decide between a miss and a miracle. The men behind her whispered again. "Waste of ammo. She's gonna miss. No one's that good." Their words fell into the dust, unheard by Daniels. Her mind was too deep inside the numbers, the rhythm of her own breathing, the silent dialogue between her and the target. The commander turned his head, silencing them with a glare. His gut twisted. He had seen skilled marksmen before. He had commanded units where sharpshooters were legends in their own right. But something about Daniels was different. She didn't chase adrenaline, didn't crave recognition. She carried her rifle as though it was a burden she had chosen to bear, a responsibility to those who stood beside her. The target bent again, sliding the mortar tube into position. Daniel's jaw clenched. She had no illusions if he succeeded. His crew would fire on their base within minutes. Their fragile safety would shatter, and men who had barely slept for days would face death again. Her finger brushed the trigger lightly, a reminder of what waited at the end of her calculation. But she didn't pull. Not yet. She needed patience. A sniper's greatest weapon wasn't the rifle, it was time. Waiting, calculating, striking only when the universe aligned. She inhaled, her lungs filling with hot, dry air. She held it, then released slowly, her body melting into stillness. The commander, watching, whispered almost unconsciously, "Who's she targeting?" The words carried weight this time. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was respect. He realized he was watching something that could defy logic itself. Daniels said nothing. Words broke concentration, and she had none to spare. Her eyes remained locked on the scope, her world narrowed to crosshairs, and a speck of life nearly 3 kilometers away. In that silence, she thought back to every missed shot in training, every failure that had burned itself into her memory. Each had taught her something about wind, patience, humility. They had built her for this moment, the way failures build strength that triumph never could. She adjusted her scope once more. The man on the ridge was still, bent over his mortar, unaware that death had already found him. The commander felt a chill despite the desert heat. He couldn't see what she saw, couldn't understand the numbers swirling in her mind. All he could do was watch and wait. And for the first time in weeks, hope crept into his chest. Through the glass of her scope, Sergeant Daniels saw the world in fragments of clarity no naked eye could ever achieve. The ridge, miles away, looked as close as a neighbor's rooftop. Heat shimmer bent the air, distorting edges, but her trained vision cut through the mirage. Every twitch of the man's shoulder, every shift of his hand against the mortar plate, played out like a film slowed to half speed. To everyone else, it was an impossible blur. To her, it was detail, precision, calculation. The mortar operator had no idea he was being studied. He bent low, aligning the tube. His comrades moved hurriedly, carrying rounds, preparing to unleash fire. Daniel's heart slowed, her pulse sinking with her breath. She had done this countless times before, but never at this distance. 2,847 meters. She didn't repeat the number in her mind. She already knew it as fact, as unyielding as gravity. The commander crouched beside her, binoculars shaking slightly in his hands. He couldn't see what she saw. He could only sense the tension, feel it in the way silence gripped the men around them. Soldiers stood frozen, eyes darting between Daniels and the distant ridge. None of them truly believed it possible. A few muttered doubts under their breath, but no one dared speak loudly enough to distract her. Daniels adjusted her dials with movements so small they were almost invisible. Each click of the scope was deliberate, the culmination of years of training. She accounted for wind drift, bullet drop, even the Coriolis effect, the planet itself, rotating beneath the bullet's path. To others, it was superstition. To her, it was math. She inhaled deeply, her rib cage rising against the stock of the Barrett. She held it for a moment, then released, letting her body sink into stillness. Her finger brushed the trigger, resting lightly, almost tenderly. The commander leaned in, whispering more to himself than to her. Who's she targeting? She didn't answer. She couldn't. In that instant, there was no room for words, no space for doubt. There was only her and the man on the ridge. Time slowed. She counted heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. On the 4th beat, her finger tightened. The trigger broke with a crisp snap. The Barrett roared. The sound was thunder rolling through the desert, rattling loose stones, vibrating through the bones of every man who heard it. The recoil slammed into her shoulder, but Daniels absorbed it, her body braced like steel. The rifle spat flame and smoke, a violent exhale that echoed against the concrete walls of the base. The bullet was gone before most even processed the sound. Invisible, it tore through the air at supersonic speed, cutting across nearly 3 kilometers of empty desert. The physics alone were staggering. In less than 3 seconds, the round would decide whether Daniels was remembered as reckless or legendary. Around her, soldiers held their breath. Conversations froze. Radios fell silent. Even the desert wind seemed to pause, as if the world itself waited to see what would happen. Daniels didn't flinch. Her cheek remained pressed to the stock, her eye glued to the scope. She tracked the ridge, searching for the moment when her calculation proved true. The commander tried to follow her gaze with his binoculars, but his heart hammered too hard, his hands shook too much. He lowered them, eyes flicking between her and the ridge, fear and awe mingling in his chest. The seconds stretched impossibly long. 3 seconds. 4. The human brain wasn't designed to process that kind of anticipation. Every soldier felt the weight of it pressing down on their lungs, squeezing them breathless. And then movement. Through the scope, Daniels saw it first. The mortar operator jerked suddenly, his body folding at the waist, collapsing sideways. One moment, he was adjusting the tube. The next, he was sprawled across the rocks, motionless. His comrades scattered, panic exploding in their ranks. One pointed toward the base, another toward the sky, but none of them seemed to comprehend what had happened. To them, the shot had been the hand of God. Daniels exhaled slowly, lowering her head for a brief moment. Relief didn't show on her face. Pride didn't either. She simply recentered herself, allowing calm to settle back into her chest. The commander's binoculars snapped back up. His breath caught as he saw the Truth One man down, the mortar abandoned, the enemy scattering. He lowered the glasses, staring at Daniels in stunned silence. "You?" His voice cracked, almost breaking the silence. "You hit him." She didn't look at him. She didn't need to. The radio crackled to life, voices confirming what everyone had seen. Target down. Repeat target down at ridge line, nearly 3 clicks out. Jesus Christ, she hit him. The base erupted. Soldiers who had doubted her seconds earlier now cheered, their disbelief transforming into awe. Some shouted, some laughed nervously. Others just shook their heads, unable to process what they had witnessed. But Daniels stayed silent. She removed the magazine, checked her chamber, and began cleaning her rifle. To her, it wasn't about celebration. It was about readiness. One target was down, but the war was not. The commander remained crouched beside her, staring as if trying to memorize every detail of the moment. His question still echoed in his head. Who's she targeting? He realized now that the answer was bigger than he had imagined. She wasn't just targeting a man on a ridge. She was targeting fear itself, targeting the doubt that had crept into every corner of his men's hearts after weeks of bombardment. And with one impossible shot, she had shattered it. The ridge fell quiet again. No mortar came. No fire rained down on their base. For the first time in weeks, the outpost felt safe, if only for a moment. Daniels slung her rifle over her shoulder and finally spoke, her voice low but steady. "Threats neutralized, sir." The commander swallowed hard and nodded. He wanted to say more, to praise her, to tell her she had just done something that would be remembered for years. But he knew she didn't want that. What she wanted, what she needed, was silence, preparation for whatever came next. He stood, scanning the horizon one last time, then looked back at his soldiers. Their eyes were wide, their postures taller. Hope had returned to them, carried on the shockwave of a single shot. And as he turned back toward Daniels, he realized something else. Records, history books, even medals, they didn't matter to her. What mattered was the man who would never fire that mortar, the comrades she had saved, and the lives she had preserved with one impossible calculation. She lay prone again, reloading calmly, eyes scanning the ridge. The commander whispered the words once more, softer this time, not as a question, but as recognition. Who's she targeting? He knew the answer now, and it changed everything. For a moment, the valley seemed frozen. The desert wind had stopped whispering. The constant buzz of flies and machinery had dulled. Even the restless chatter of soldiers died in their throats. It was as if the entire world had paused to process what had just happened. The Barrett's roar still echoed faintly against the mountains. A shot that had begun as disbelief now hung in the air like legend. Every soldier in the outpost had turned instinctively toward the ridge. Every pair of eyes strained to confirm whether their sniper had truly done the impossible. Then they saw it. The mortar man lay sprawled across the rocks, his body twisted unnaturally, his crew scattering like startled animals. The tube he had been adjusting tipped sideways, harmless now, clattering onto the stone. One insurgent dragged another toward cover, but their retreat had already lost its purpose. The threat had ended before it began. The radio erupted. Voices overlapped, some frantic, others jubilant. Target neutralized. Confirm targets down at nearly 3 clicks out. Another soldier's voice, cracking with awe. Sweet mother of she nailed him. She actually hit him. The commander lowered his binoculars. His hands trembled slightly as he let them hang against his chest. For weeks, he had carried the weight of hopelessness, the sense that no matter how hard they fought, the enemy would always find a way to bring fire down on them. But now, for the first time, that weight cracked. He turned to the figure lying calmly in the dust. Daniels hadn't moved. Her cheek was still pressed against the stock, her eyes still locked through the scope. Her breathing remained steady, unshaken by the eruption of voices around her. While the others celebrated, she waited, scanning the ridge to confirm what instinct already told her. Snipers did not rely on chance. They relied on proof. Only when she was certain the crew had fled, and the mortar was abandoned, did she slowly pull her head away from the glass. She blinked, her lashes crusted with desert grit. The Barrett's barrel still smoked faintly, curling tendrils of heat, warping the air above it. The commander crouched beside her again. Words fought to leave his mouth, praise, admiration, even disbelief, but none seemed adequate. His throat felt dry, his voice hollow in the shadow of what he had just witnessed. You saved us," he finally said. Daniels didn't look at him. Instead, she ejected the spent casing, the metallic clang sharp against the sudden quiet. She reached for her cleaning kit, wiping dust and carbon from the chamber. Her movements were steady, almost ritualistic. To her, there was no difference between preparation before a shot and maintenance after it. Both were survival. Both were duty. Threat neutralized, she answered simply. Behind them, the base was alive with noise. Soldiers cheered, clapped each other on the shoulders, even laughed for the first time in weeks. Their relief spilled over in a flood of voices, retelling what had just happened as if each man had been the one behind the trigger. Nearly 3 kilometers. Did you hear that? Never seen anything like it. Never even heard of anything like it. Daniels just made history. But Daniels ignored them. She slid a cleaning brush down the barrel, her focus narrowed on the rifle, as though nothing had changed. For her, the moment had passed. There would be more battles, more targets, more impossible choices. To linger on one shot, no matter how extraordinary, was to risk complacency. The commander rose slowly, letting his gaze travel across the men. Their postures had changed. Shoulders once hunched with dread now stood taller. Eyes once dulled by exhaustion now burned with energy. It was as if a fire had been lit inside them, a reminder that their fight was not hopeless. And it all came from one soldier. The commander turned back to Daniels, watching her run a cloth along the bolt with quiet precision. He realized then that she would never fully understand the depth of what she had given them. To her, it was mechanics and math. To them, it was salvation. He thought of his earlier words, whispered before the shot. Who's she targeting? At first, it had been a question born of curiosity, then of awe. Now he understood it was something else entirely. She had not targeted a man. She had targeted despair itself, the crushing hopelessness that had plagued his men for weeks. And with one pull of the trigger, she had destroyed it. Nearby, a young private approached, his face still glowing with disbelief. He looked at Daniels, hesitated, then stammered, "Sergeant, That was incredible. You're a legend. Daniels glanced up briefly, her eyes calm but unreadable. Get back to your post, Private. Mortar don't fire themselves. The young man flushed, embarrassed, and hurried off. The commander almost smiled. That was Daniels, uninterested in glory, uninterested in praise. Her focus never shifted from the mission, from the unyielding reality that one victory did not end a war. As night fell over the desert, the story of the shot spread. Soldiers gathered in small circles, whispering about what they had seen. Some exaggerated the distance. Some described the shot as though they had felt the bullet pass by them. But all agreed on one thing. It had been the impossible, made real. The commander retreated to his quarters, but found no rest. He replayed the moment in his mind, the thunder of the Barrett, the endless seconds of silence, the collapse of the mortar man on the ridge. Each time, the memory struck deeper, carving itself into him. He had commanded men for years, seen bravery and sacrifice, but this was different. Daniels had not just executed a perfect shot. She had changed the air around them. She had altered the way his men carried themselves, the way they believed in survival. That kind of influence could not be measured in meters or medals. He sat at his desk, staring at a blank report. How could he write what he had seen? Sergeant Daniels eliminated a target at 2,847 meters with a Barrett rifle. The words seemed too sterile, too cold. They did not capture the silence, the disbelief, the way hope had surged like a tide. Finally, he set the pen down. Some things, he realized, were not meant to be captured on paper. They were meant to be carried in memory, retold not as statistics, but as legend. Out on the wall, Daniels still kept watch, her silhouette sharp against the fading stars. She hadn't celebrated. She hadn't spoken. She simply waited, her rifle resting at her side, her eyes scanning the horizon for the next threat. And the commander knew, without doubt, that when the next test came, she would be ready. By dawn, the desert was already awake with rumors. Word of the impossible shot moved through the base like fire leaping across dry brush. Soldiers from neighboring outposts radioed in, asking if the story was true. Even those who had not seen the strike claimed they had heard the thunder of the Barrett echo across the valley. Each telling of the event grew larger, richer, and more impossible. At first, the commander dismissed the chatter. He expected the excitement to fade by morning, replaced once again by exhaustion and routine. But when he stepped outside, he realized the fire was only spreading. Men who had barely spoken to each other before were clustered together, retelling the moment as though they had all been there on the ridge with Daniels. The shot was nearly 3 kilometers, I swear it. No closer to 3.5. They said the wind shifted, and she still compensated perfectly. The commander listened quietly, surprised by the unity the story seemed to bring. For weeks, fear had hollowed the men's voices. Now they spoke with something else, something almost forgotten. Pride. Daniels, however, remained unchanged. She sat by her rifle, methodically checking the bolt, the scope, the bipod. She tuned out the noise around her, her mind steady on the practical details. Ammunition counts. Wind readings. Target ranges. To her, the previous day was already filed away under completed objectives. She did not smile, did not gloat, and did not seem to notice the glances her fellow soldiers kept stealing in her direction. At breakfast, the mess hall erupted when she walked in. Men pushed their trays aside to make room for her. One soldier slapped the table and grinned. Ladies and gentlemen, the deadliest shot in history. The room cheered. Daniels paused, her tray balanced in her hands. She hated the sound of it, not the cheering itself, but what it meant. They wanted a hero, someone to shoulder their fears, someone larger than the war itself. But she was only a soldier, one among many, and in her heart she knew legends had a way of swallowing the people behind them. She sat quietly, spooning bland rations into her mouth, while the others talked around her. She offered no corrections, no embellishments. She let the stories grow without her. By midday, the news had reached higher command. A helicopter roared down onto the base, its rotors throwing dust into the air. Officers stepped out, their uniforms pressed, their eyes hungry for confirmation. They demanded to know if it was true, if one of their snipers had really broken every known record with a single shot. The commander nodded, pointing toward Daniels. She was back at her post, binoculars in hand, scanning the ridges as if nothing extraordinary had happened. When the officers approached, she stood at attention, her movements crisp and professional. They asked her to describe the shot, the calculations, the moment itself. She answered in the same calm voice she always used, her words stripped of emotion. Range, 2,847 meters. Wind direction southwest, 15 knots. Target, confirmed hostile mortar operator. Result, neutralized. That was all she said. The officers pressed for more, but she remained steady, offering only facts. Finally, they left, frustrated by her lack of theatrics. Yet even in their frustration, their excitement grew. Reports began moving up the chain of command. Numbers were recorded. Distances confirmed. By evening, the story had reached beyond the desert. In distant offices, men in suits whispered about the shot. News outlets caught wind of a record-breaking sniper in a nameless desert outpost. Military analysts debated on television, drawing maps and diagrams to explain what it meant to hit a target at such a range. They used words like historic and unprecedented. Back at the base, Daniels tuned the chatter out. She was not interested in debates or records. Her world was measured in wind calls and trigger pulls, not headlines. Still, she could not escape the glances. Men who once treated her as just another soldier now watched her with a reverence she did not want. Some saluted her outside of protocol. Others offered her the last of their rations or volunteered to cover her night shifts. The attention pressed in on her like a weight. That night, the commander found her cleaning her rifle again under the dim glow of a lantern. He sat across from her, his boots crunching on the gravel. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "They're saying you broke every record in the book." Daniels didn't look up. "I wasn't aiming for records." "I know," he said. "But it doesn't matter. People need to believe in something. Right now, they believe in you." Her hands stilled for a moment on the rifle, her eyes narrowing. "Belief doesn't stop mortar." The commander studied her face. He saw no arrogance, no thrill in her own legend. Only weariness. It was the kind of weariness that came from carrying too much, too long. He realized then that while the world was busy turning her into a symbol, Daniels was still fighting the same quiet war inside herself. "Maybe not," he admitted, "but it gives men the strength to stand their ground. And that's worth more than you think." She said nothing, sliding the bolt back into place with a metallic click. Over the next week, the base changed. Soldiers trained harder, walked taller. Patrols felt sharper, more alert. It wasn't that the dangers had vanished. Insurgents still lurked. Ambushes still threatened, but the men no longer carried the same crushing dread. They carried Daniel's shot with them, tucked into their memories like a talisman. And yet, Daniels herself remained untouched by the glow of legend. She rose each morning, checked her rifle, took her position on the wall. She scanned the horizon not for applause, but for movement, for shadows, for the next threat. Because she knew better than anyone, one perfect shot did not end a war. It only bought you time until the next one. The desert had a way of swallowing news, but not this time. By the end of the week, Daniel's shot had become more than a story. It was a symbol. Commanders referenced it in briefings. Politicians mentioned it in speeches. Across the ocean, headlines celebrated an unnamed sniper who had set a record unmatched in history. But while the outside world celebrated, the inside of the outpost shifted in ways Daniels found harder to bear. Every patrol leader wanted her eyes on their mission. Every defensive plan had her stationed at the highest point, as if her presence alone could bend fate. Men no longer referred to her as Sergeant Daniels. They called her the sniper, the record, or sometimes just the shot. The weight of those names pressed against her like the desert sun constant, unrelenting. At first, she endured it in silence. She took her assignments, carried her rifle, and remained the same disciplined soldier she had always been. But as the days passed, she felt the shift. Her comrades no longer treated her as one of them. They treated her as something else, an idea, a weapon, a living talisman that shielded them from fear. The commander noticed it too. He watched her eat alone in the mess hall, watched men hesitate before approaching her, unsure if they were speaking to a peer or to the legend she had unwillingly become. He wanted to step in, to shield her from the glare, but how could he? He knew better than anyone that soldiers needed something to hold on to, and right now, Daniels was that something. But beyond the wire, enemies listened as well. Intercepted chatter confirmed what the commander feared. Insurgents had heard about the shot. To them, it wasn't just a tale, it was a challenge. They spoke of the woman sniper with both fear and fury. Some wanted revenge, others wanted the glory of being the one to silence her. It wasn't long before rumors spread of counter-snipers arriving in the area. Men brought in from distant regions with one task: find the ghost on the ridge. Daniels knew it. She felt the shift in the air every time she placed her cheek against the stock. The valley was no longer just a battlefield. It was a chessboard, each move more deliberate, each silence more dangerous. She wasn't just hunting anymore. She was being hunted. The first attempt came at dawn. She was lying prone, scanning the ridges, when a faint glint caught her eye. It was the kind of flash only a sniper would notice, the sun bouncing off glass, just for an instant. Without hesitation, she shifted, calculating the angle. Her scope settled on a figure tucked behind stone. A rifle pointed in her direction. The world slowed. Her finger brushed the trigger, her breathing narrowed, and she fired. The shot cracked the stillness, echoing across the valley. A distant figure slumped, the rifle sliding from his hands. Daniels exhaled, not in triumph, but in grim acknowledgement. The game had begun. When the report reached the commander, his face hardened. "They're coming for you now," Daniels shrugged. "Then let them come." But inside, she felt the weight. Every day at her post was no longer just defense. It was survival against unseen eyes, unseen barrels pointed back at her. She tightened her routines. She adjusted her hides more frequently, varied her positions, and spent longer hours scanning the ridges. Sleep became fractured, shallow. The rifle was no longer just her weapon. It was her shield against the invisible gaze that hunted her. The men noticed her fatigue, though they mistook it for tireless devotion. They whispered about her discipline, her vigilance. They didn't see the toll it carved into her. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, the commander found her sitting alone, her rifle disassembled across her lap. Her eyes were darker, ringed with exhaustion, but steady as ever. "You know they're not just looking to kill you," he said quietly. "They're looking to kill what you represent." Daniels glanced up, her hands pausing. "I don't represent anything. You do to them. And to us?" She said nothing, focusing again on the rifle. To her, meaning had no place in war. There were only task sights aligned, breath steady, trigger pulled. But she could not deny the change. Each shot now carried more than the life of a single enemy. Each shot carried the fragile morale of everyone who believed in her. And that was the heaviest weight of all. Days turned into weeks, and the pressure grew. More counter-snipers appeared, each more skilled than the last. Daniels bested them one by one, but each encounter left her more drained, more aware of the fine line she walked. The legend of her shot had made her untouchable in the eyes of her comrades. But to her enemies, it had painted a target on her back brighter than any she had ever seen. One night, she dreamed of the mortar man, the one who had fallen at 2,847 meters. In her dream, he stood again, faceless, pointing back at her. She woke with her heart racing, her hand instinctively reaching for the Barrett at her side. She sat awake until dawn, staring into the dark horizon, the weight of unseen crosshairs pressing against her chest. The commander found her there at sunrise. He didn't scold her for the lack of sleep. Instead, he stood beside her, the silence stretching between them. "You don't have to carry this alone," he finally said. Daniels kept her eyes on the horizon. "Yes, I do." And she believed it. Because legends, once born, belonged not to the people who created them, but to everyone who needed them. And whether she liked it or not, she had become one. The desert night was heavy with anticipation. Stars glittered above, but their light offered no comfort. Every soldier at the outpost moved with caution, the weight of unseen eyes pressing down like a second sun. Sergeant Daniels lay prone on her observation post, her Barrett rifle cradled carefully against the sandbags. Every instinct screamed vigilance. Every muscle tensed for the slightest flicker, the faintest shimmer that might reveal danger. The past weeks had been relentless. Enemy chatter, intercepted and analyzed, confirmed her suspicions. Insurgents had deployed a team specifically to eliminate her. Counter-snipers, the best they could bring, trained to track the ghost on the ridge. Every encounter had reinforced her caution, and now she knew they would not hesitate. Her focus narrowed, vision locked through the scope. The valley stretched endlessly, every ridge, every rock, every shadow, a potential threat. She scanned methodically, each movement calculated, controlled. Wind readings, temperature shifts, mirages, all factors in the deadly equation of survival. The commander approached quietly, binoculars in hand. He had learned to trust her instincts more than anyone else's reports. "Daniels," he murmured, his voice low. "They're moving faster tonight. 2 kilometers out, ridge 5 o'clock. I'd check if it was normal, but I don't think this is normal." Daniels didn't reply. Her mind was already running the calculations. Distance, elevation, bullet drop, time to target. One slight misjudgment and her position could be compromised. One mistake and the legend she had built over weeks could be ended before the sun rose. Movement flickered on the horizon, a subtle glint, the reflection of a scope catching moonlight. Daniel's heart rate didn't rise. Her pulse remained measured. Years of training had programmed her body to do what her mind demanded without hesitation. She adjusted her rifle, dialed in the wind drift, and tracked the intruder. Seconds stretched into eternity. Every muscle tightened. Soldiers nearby felt the tension radiating from her. Even the commander, hardened by years of battle, instinctively lowered his binoculars, letting her take the lead. Then the first shot rang out, not from her rifle, but from the enemy. The bullet struck sand nearby, spraying grains like sparks. Daniels reacted instantly, firing once, twice, each round calculated to force the enemy to adjust. Her barrel flared in the moonlight, smoke curling upward, yet her aim never wavered. The enemy returned fire, each bullet striking closer, but she was always ahead, anticipating the trajectory, the movement, the strategy. The duel was silent to anyone watching from the base. All they could see was the flash of her weapon, the calm precision of her form, and the faint glow of determination in her eyes. Minutes stretched like hours. One by one, insurgents fell, neutralized before they could find their rhythm. Daniels moved subtly, changing her position, ensuring no trace of her location remained visible. Every adjustment was deliberate, every choice a measure of survival and tactical brilliance. The commander, observing from his post, realized the enormity of what he was witnessing. He had seen snipers before, even exceptional ones. But Daniel's combination of calm, calculation, and lethal precision elevated her to something beyond comprehension. She wasn't just a soldier, she was a force of nature, bending the desert, the wind, and the very battlefield to her will. Finally, the last insurgent attempted a maneuver, seeking a high vantage point to strike her. Daniels anticipated it. Her scope traced his movement, accounting for distance, wind, and rotation of the earth. One breath, one heartbeat, and her trigger broke. The round struck true. The insurgent collapsed, and silence returned. The outpost exhaled collectively, realizing the danger had passed. For the soldiers, it was a moment of disbelief, awe, and relief. Daniels lowered her rifle, her face calm, unreadable. She wasn't celebrating. She was already scanning the horizon for the next threat, mentally preparing for the possibility that the night wasn't over. The commander approached once again, finally breaking the silence. "You've done it again," he said softly. "You've saved this base, and no one even knew they were in danger until now." She shrugged. "That's the job, sir. No one needs to know until it's too late." The soldiers around them, though exhausted, were now inspired beyond words. The legend of Daniels had grown, not just because of one shot, but because she had survived against enemies who had come for her specifically. Her calm under pressure, her unwavering focus, and her deadly precision had transformed fear into hope. Later, in the quiet aftermath, Daniels gathered her sharpshooters. She taught them what she had done instinctively, reading the terrain, tracking movement, accounting for environmental variables. She didn't boast of her kills or glory. She taught strategy, discipline, and survival. The commander observed her quietly. He realized she wasn't just a sniper anymore, she was a mentor, a leader whose influence extended beyond the battlefield. Her legend inspired skill, courage, and belief in those around her. She was shaping the future of the unit as much as she was defending it. By dawn, news of the night's events spread through communication channels. Commanders, intelligence analysts, and even media outlets were abuzz. They spoke of a sniper who had not only broken records, but had survived repeated attempts on her life while neutralizing threats with impossible precision. Inside the base, Daniels continued her routine, indifferent to fame or admiration. Her world was simple: calculation, preparation, and survival. Yet the effect of her actions rippled outward, shaping not only the morale of her soldiers, but also the strategies of those who opposed them. The commander, watching her one last time before leaving for briefings, whispered quietly to himself, a mixture of respect and awe in his voice. She's not just targeting enemies anymore. She's targeting fear itself. And she's winning. Daniels didn't hear him. She never needed to. She was already scanning the horizon, ready for whatever came next. The desert had quieted once more, but it was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of respect, earned and undeniable. Weeks of tension, anticipation, and battle had passed, and the forward operating base now carried a new air. Soldiers moved with confidence, not recklessness, their steps lighter but precise, each one buoyed by the knowledge that their sharpest edge had survived against impossible odds. Sergeant Daniels walked among them, rifle slung casually across her shoulder, but every eye followed her. Not as a comrade, not merely as a soldier, but as a symbol, an impossible benchmark of skill, patience, and resilience. The stories of the record-breaking 2,847-meter shot and of her repeated survival against those sent to eliminate her had cemented her place in both the lore and daily lives of everyone in the outpost. Despite the accolades and hushed whispers, Daniels remained untouched by them. To her, nothing had changed. She checked the sights on her rifle, inspected the scope for the faintest dust, and ensured her equipment was mission-ready. Fame, admiration, and fear were irrelevant. The battlefield did not bend to legend. It demanded precision, vigilance, and preparation. The commander approached her quietly, walking past cheering soldiers who still whispered the story of the impossible shot. "You've changed this place," he said softly, his voice carrying a mixture of awe and respect. Daniels didn't look up immediately. She adjusted her bipod, lining the legs in perfect symmetry with the dirt beneath them. Finally, she met his gaze. "I did my job," she replied simply. "No," he said. "You did more than that. You gave them hope. You gave them courage, and you gave them a legend." She studied him for a moment, the faintest flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. It wasn't pride, not in the traditional sense. It was understanding, a recognition that what she had done mattered far beyond what any shot, any calculation, or any sniper record could measure. The men gathered around began asking her questions, eager for advice, tips, or insight into the impossible calculation she had achieved. Daniels answered each quietly, deliberately, never embellishing, never boasting. Her methodical instruction impressed them as much as her lethal precision had. She taught them to see what others missed, the subtle shifts in wind, the faint glint of sunlight, the rhythm of a distant figure's movement. The commander watched as her influence spread beyond her rifle. The soldiers began to emulate her discipline, her patience, her attention to detail. Where there had once been fear, there was now vigilance. Where there had been hesitation, there was resolve. Her legend had transformed into practical strength, an unspoken backbone for the unit. In the evenings, when the sun sank behind the jagged ridges, the base would gather briefly to recount stories of Daniel's feats. Her record-breaking shot became the central tale, and even more so, her survival under relentless attempts to eliminate her. She didn't participate, but she listened, ensuring the facts were accurate while letting the myth grow naturally. Beyond the base, her story traveled. Reports reached the Pentagon, news outlets, and international military channels. Analysts dissected her shot, publishing diagrams of trajectory, wind calculations, and ballistic arcs. Even retired snipers, veterans of decades, marveled at the precision, noting that she had achieved something that many had deemed impossible. Yet, Daniels herself remained unchanged. She still rose at dawn, still checked her equipment, still scanned the horizon. The desert demanded it, the war demanded it, and she accepted that her own peace lay not in recognition, but in readiness. One afternoon, the commander approached her again. "Daniels," he said, lowering himself to one knee to meet her eye level, "the world is calling this the longest shot in history. Your name, or at least your actions, will be remembered for years." She adjusted her gloves and said nothing at first. Then quietly she spoke. "Names don't matter. Only results. Only survival." He nodded, understanding that the words reflected her ethos. Legends were made by actions, not accolades. And in the case of Daniels, actions had rewritten the definition of what a soldier could achieve. The months that followed were quieter, though never easy. The enemy continued to probe the region, but the base now moved with a precision born of both training and inspiration. Patrols were faster, scouts sharper, communications clearer. Soldiers no longer whispered fearfully at every shadow they acted, calculated, survived. All of it carried Daniel's influence, an invisible guide in the heat, dust, and danger of the desert. One evening, as she stood at her post watching the sunset stretch the desert into shades of gold and crimson, the commander joined her silently. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked. "The record, the shot, the legend?" She exhaled slowly, letting the wind brush across her face. "I think about the men," she replied finally. "The ones who are still out there. The ones who still need me. That's what I remember. That's what matters." He studied her profile against the fading light. He knew she was right. The record, the headlines, the impossible calculation, they were all trivial compared to lives saved, the morale preserved, and the men inspired. Daniel's legacy wasn't in a number. It was in every soldier who now moved with confidence where fear had once dominated. In every life her precision had protected, and in the unwavering resolve she had instilled. As night fell and stars began to sprinkle across the sky, Daniels adjusted her rifle one last time for the day. She rested briefly, then resumed her vigil, scanning the desert horizon for threats, shadows, and movement. The world might see a legend. She saw responsibility, and in that responsibility lay her true power. The commander, watching from behind, whispered almost to himself, "She's not just a sniper. She's the standard by which we'll measure all who follow." Daniels didn't hear him. She never did. She was already focused, already calculating, already living in the delicate balance between patience and precision. And that balance between life and death, fear and courage, impossibility and action, was the true mark of her legacy. In the quiet desert, under the stars and the watchful eyes of every soldier whose life she had touched, Sergeant Daniels remained vigilant. Her rifle was loaded, her mind sharp, and her legend secure, not in fame, but in the survival, courage, and hope she inspired. And that was enough.